Good morning, Matthew. Now, this morning, I just want to chat to you about the meeting that was held last night. Now, there are various issues on the agenda. The main one that was a concern for me primarily, and I guess many people like me, considering I have young children, was the fact that we've discovered there has been no fluoride in the water since 2019. Now, did this issue come up last night? What is Council going to do to address this problem?
Well, the first thing that we want to do is tell the community, and that's a major failing in my opinion, that effectively we've had the council has been supplying water, and in good faith, you with children, every other community member out there has been drinking that water under the assumption that that has been complying with all the relevant standards. The Fluoridation of Public Water Supply Act 1957, number 58, says in section 6B that if you're providing fluoride in the water, you can't just stop putting fluoride in the water. If you do so, it is an offence against the Act. It's a fairly serious thing to just stop putting fluoride in the water. Now, Council didn't just stop doing it. They had a failure of a piece of equipment, and the staff at the water treatment plant reported that failure through the relevant channels at Council, up to their director and through to the CEO. They reported that through to New South Wales Health. I've seen the reports that have gone through to New South Wales Health, and this is all happening back in January 2019. They actually engaged a consultant to come and look at it to see what would be required to make some changes to fix that. So the operational staff, the staff that are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, were doing all the right steps, taking all the right processes to fix the issue. Now, where the failure occurred, in my opinion, is at the upper levels of management of Council, where the first thing they should have done is they should have informed the community. They didn't inform the community. They just kept it quiet, hoping that they could either fix the problem or make it go away or ignore the problem. I'm not sure. I can't really speak to the mindset of people there at the time. And then, after a few months of this process going through, it appears, from looking on the outside in, that nothing was done about it. So they just left it alone. Now, our staff kept reporting it. Our staff kept telling New South Wales Health in their annual reports, they kept telling our senior management that this issue needed to be fixed, and it seemingly was largely ignored. Along comes a new CEO and obviously a new group of councillors, and the issue wasn't even known about. The new director, there's a new director in that division, new CEO, new councillors. No one actually knew about it because all those reports that have been going through to the senior levels of staff, none of those senior levels of staff were there anymore, and they hadn't started any corrective action to actually fix this problem. And again, it comes back to that issue, Sam, they still hadn't told the community about it. And it was only a fluke coffee that my wife happened to have with someone who said that she thought there wasn't fluoride being put in the water. And my wife almost scoffed at that and said, well, of course there is. We know fluoride's in the water, but I'll ask my husband. And she asked me, and I scoffed at it as well and said, well, of course there is. We have to put fluoride in the water. And I said, but just to make everyone feel comfortable, I'll check with the CEO. And he scoffed at me and said, of course there is. We've got to put fluoride in the water. And then, to his credit, he went and then did some more digging and found out that actually, no, we weren't putting fluoride in the water, which was then the process that we started to make sure we communicated with the community. We've already done some investigation to see what we need to do and how we need to fix the problem. And the council meeting last night really was about informing the community, make sure the community knows, and here are the corrective steps. So we're now engaging with Public Works. We have already started that process to say, what do we need to do? We need a scope of works. We need to work out how to repair this problem. We'll go through and get that done. We'll then get a specification done up. We'll then go to tender, and then we'll get a company to actually go and rectify that problem. The commitment we've made is we're aiming before June next year to have the problem rectified. It's not a 5-minute fix, obviously, but at least in the first instance, let the community know so that if you do have people with young children or even just people that want to take better care of their teeth, they know that if they wish to put fluoride in the water, they've got to add it manually until we then will announce at some stage that the water has now got fluoride in it again.
So I'm thinking I need to go buy fluoride tablets for my children.
I can't give medical advice, but in the old days before fluoride was added to the water, then certainly people did have fluoride tablets. And it'd be the sort of thing that I'd recommend people talk to their dentists about, look up some articles from New South Wales Health, find some professionals. Again, I'm not qualified to give advice about dental health, but what I can tell you is that there is no additional fluoride being added to our water as it stands at this moment, and it hasn't been since January 2019.
Well, at least you're getting onto it. That's encouraging. But the summary is it was a failure on the part of the last council. to not address this issue and also not to communicate to the public what was going on. You're seeking to not only communicate to the public, but you're also addressing and rectifying the problem. So that's encouraging to see.
And let me just clarify one part there. Sorry, Sam. I would say it's a failure of the upper levels of management of the last council. I want to make sure that people know that the staff doing their day-to-day jobs at the water treatment plant did all the right things. So I wouldn't say there was a failure there. I would say the failure in the last council was at the senior levels, the very senior levels of council.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Now, I believe you talked a bit about travel you do in your job. I believe you have an electric car. Is that correct?
I do.
Now, are you looking at more electric charging stations around the region to try and facilitate people who do own electric cars? Was that something that came up?
It was, exactly right. So the New South Wales Government, Sam, has a destination charging grant available. So first of all, council had to decide whether to go for that. It's a co-contribution, so there will be some contribution from council and the costs for that vary. But the main thing for that, once the councillors had decided that yes, we should go ahead, was to put a priority level. And in the report we had, there were 6 different areas that we looked at in terms of potential priorities. And councillors decided that the priority level should be the Wellington Library as the number one point that we should focus on. Again, we can put in multiple applications, but we may not get all those applications. So it was important to have some sort of priority listing. So Wellington Library was the number one. That seemed like a good spot for people to park down the CBD of Wellington. They may not necessarily want to visit the library per se, but it's quite a nice library down there, but it puts you right in the heart of Wellington. So when people park there, plug into charge, they might go and visit some shops, spend some money there. The Wellington Caves was the second one. That made a lot of sense because it's a great tourist attraction anyway. And when people stop at the Wellington Caves, they're not stopping for 5 minutes. They are stopping for a length of time. So having a destination charger there, I think, is a really important thing to do. The third one was the Wailandra Street Council Car Park. So that's the one over near Club Dubbo on the Newell Highway. Again, being on the Newell Highway makes sense. People are travelling along that highway, stopping there. There's a park there and there's some toilets and there's even accommodation around that area there. So we thought that'd be a good spot for people to park and charge their car. The next one was Elizabeth Park. Now, that's a beautiful area up there anyway. And once again, it's one of those places that people go to and stop for a period of time. So a destination charger there made a lot of sense. And obviously you've got the new Wiradjuri Centre that's being built up there. You've got the Adventure Playground, the Botanic Garden. So there's a whole range of things up there for people to see and look at while they're there. The fifth one in our priority list was the Dubbo Visitors Information Centre. Again, great spot. Get some information about the city. Go and walk up into the CBD. Dubbo's already well served at the moment near the Western Plains Cultural Centre, where we've got 4 Tesla chargers and 1 NRMA charger, but having some chargers down there at the Visitors Information Centre made some sense as well. And the sixth one was the Wellington Visitors Information Centre. Now, that's not too far away from the Wellington Library, so you probably would only get one or other of those, but if they were handing out lots of money in those, then the Wellington Visitors Information Centre has still got a slightly different location. It's near the Aquatic and Leisure Centre, and there's other shops and restaurants, and plus you've got that Visitors Information Centre there as well, so you can go in there and have a look at various things in there. So it made sense. And one of the things that I've found, Sam, when I've parked my car, plugging in and charging up, whenever people pull up beside you, you'll have a bit of a chat to them, ask them about their car, ask about their range, a whole range of nerdy things that EV drivers might talk about. But one thing that surprised me, I was in Bathurst one day and I plugged in and I saw a car pull up, and it was a car that I haven't actually driven. I tried to drive lots of different EVs and I hadn't driven this one. And so I started asking the owner about it, and I said, "So what are you doing in Bathurst at the moment?" He said, "Oh, I'm just visiting the charger." And I was a bit confused, and I said, "What do you mean you're just visiting the charger?" And he was a person who lived in Sydney. He'd bought his EV and he loved to just go driving in his EV. He loved to drive it. So he looked for places that had an EV charging station, and he would drive to there, charge up, look around that community, maybe stay overnight, and then go back home. So that's exactly what he was doing in Bathurst. He'd driven to Bathurst, charged up, he was staying there, looking around some different attractions in Bathurst, and the next day he was going back home. So I didn't know about it, but there is actually a whole tourist aspect to having an EV charging station in. So it's not just about charging up as you're driving through or visiting somewhere else and then charging up as you happen to be there. People are visiting EV charging stations. So I think that's a great thing as well. So that's our priority list. We'll go forward to government now. Our staff will go forward to government and put those applications in and try and get some funding for EV charging stations in some of those locations.
Fantastic. And it certainly sounds like it'd be part of your environmental policy to be encouraging this. Media policy that was mentioned, did that come up last night? What kind of safeguards are in place here?
Yeah, certainly. So we do have a social media policy now for council staff and for official council pages, and also for the pages that councillors might have as councillors in council. So that was something that obviously is a very important thing with the modern environment we live in. I know that council has a very big focus on communication with the public. And as much as we love radio stations and communicating via radio stations, there is obviously a large component of people who use social media to find out their information. We had a previous policy which was largely based on the state government's draft media policy, social media policy. The state government has now ratified their social media policy. They've made a few minor changes to it, and from our perspective, this was really the same thing where we were just updating ours to match essentially what the state government has. We thought we don't need to reinvent the wheel. So that was really about what you expect, and a lot of it is common sense, Sam, but I suppose the part here is that just make sure you've got the policy in writing so the community can see it, and obviously councillors and council staff can see it, and they can look at that and adhere to that. Now, it is only out on public exhibition at the moment, so it hasn't been the adopted policy. As with many policies or all policies of council, the policy will go through some sort of public consultation process. So this policy has now been ratified by council last night to go on public exhibition. Once it's on public exhibition, it will be out there for a period of time, and then it will come back to council with any submissions the public makes, and then be finally ratified or possibly modified, and then that will be the policy of council. So what I'd encourage people to do is go and have a look at that draft social media policy. If there's things in there they think not appropriate, or they should be added or subtracted, any changes at all, please send those through as submissions to council, and then they will be part of what comes back to councillors to either ratify what's there or make changes.
Okay. No, well, that sounds good. Okay, tell me about the purple pipeline. I believe this is something, again, a carryover from the previous council.
Yeah, you may well remember, and many people in Dubbo at the time were probably complaining about it, but there was a purple pipeline that was put in, and most people were most conscious of it around Bligh Street. So people saw a very large trench being dug along Bligh Street, and that was taking a pipeline from the water treatment plant, or just for the fields near the water treatment plant, all the way out to our sewage treatment plant. And there were two pipelines in there in general, but there was one main pipeline that was designed to take treated effluent that comes out of our sewage treatment plant about 13.2 kilometres from our sewage treatment plant all the way down to essentially the sporting fields near our water treatment plant. Now, the idea was that when you have a drought and when you have an absolute need for as much water as possible that you can feed into the water treatment plant, some of those fields down there had the ability to be watered from bores that were available. But rather than use that bore water on the fields, the idea was to use bore water in the water treatment plant. So that makes sense. Logically, yes, let's use that essential water, that crucial water from the bores, to let our people drink water rather than water a field. But then there's a huge cost. If we let those fields die, there's a huge cost to basically re-turf those fields. So we needed some water. So the proposal was put forward, let's take treated effluent from the sewage treatment plant down to those fields. The problem was that the last council built that pipeline without getting approval from the environmental part of the state government to get permission to use treated effluent on those sporting fields. Now, those sporting fields sit over the top of an aquifer where we take the water from the bores. So there were some tricky parts to go through that process, and it was always seen as high risk because the state government in their environmental protection areas don't like to have treated effluent going into the aquifer. So it was always seen as high risk, and it was identified by previous staff. And the pipeline went ahead regardless before they'd received approvals. The pipeline's been finished. The pipeline had been finished some time ago. And then when the council said, now let's start putting that treated effluent down on the sporting fields, the state government said, no, you can't do that. You can't put that water on there because it could go down into the aquifer. You then take water from the aquifer up into the water treatment plant. Then you're effectively taking treated effluent up into there. The only way you can get permission to do it is to treat the water at the sewage treatment plant to a much higher standard before you send it down the line, which adds additional costs to that process, it would make it the most expensive water in Dubbo to have that there just to then run it down and then put it on those fields. If you're going to do that, you just find other water sources like more bore fields. So at the moment we've got a pipeline which largely is not able to be used for what it was actually designed to be used for. The state government gave council the money for that. Council didn't spend any money, but it's still public money that's been used for that. And the simple example I would use, Sam, is sometimes people go and build garages without getting approvals. And then they come to council and say, I've built this garage in my home. Could you please give me approval? Council has the ability to say, no, you didn't comply with various standards. You didn't get approval before you started. So no, you've got to knock that garage down. Now, it's the same sort of thing. We tell residents all the time, get your approvals first before you go and do your building. Go and make sure you're allowed to do what you want to do before you do it. And in this case, council didn't follow its own advice and went and built something without getting the approval. So it is, to my mind, a failure of upper management of council just not going through the right processes and not following those steps. Now, we, in terms of the current council, have got a pipeline on the ground that we can't use for what it was originally intended for. We're now working through a process, and this is what came up last night, to try and work out different ways we might be able to use that same pipeline, spending some extra money to basically connect different components to it. So we might take water from some areas up to other sporting fields. We might take backwash water from the water treatment plant, for example, take that off to other sporting fields. Our excellent and clever staff will come up with some other way to utilise that rather than just leave a dead asset sitting in the ground that we can't use at all. But there will be some costs associated with that. And what essentially came out of last night was there'll be some report put together that analyses how we could use that pipeline, analyses what the cost might be of that, and then look for approval from council to go ahead with that. Or the alternative might be just to say we walk away from those millions of dollars that have been put in the ground. It's not worth spending X number of dollars more to try and make some use of it. It is, again, a failure of planning from upper management of council.
Wow. Certainly is a complete failure. And, it's good to see that you're thinking about both options, because I dare say there are pros and cons to trying to utilise the pipeline. But as you said, it's extra expense, so whether that's worth spending, I guess is an issue still to be debated, I dare say, is it?
That's right, and we'll wait for the data, and that's one thing that council certainly talked about last night was, please give us the data, tell us how much it's going to cost us to build something that will allow us to take advantage of that, and then compare that against the cost of, again, parts of that pipeline can be used already, but compare that against the cost of how much we'd have to walk away from if we left those parts in the ground, and then make a decision with the data. And I know myself in particular, and I know many of the councils are very focused on making decisions with all the data available, making sure it's accurate data, making sure we've got all that data available, and making that open and transparent to the community, and then make decisions based on that. And again, we don't expect the community to agree with every decision that council makes, but as long as they can see why it's being made, they can see the logic of that, hear what councils have got to say about those decisions, then at least council or councillors feel comfortable that the community is aware of why they're making certain decisions. And this will be another one of those. It will be a case of how much to do something to rectify this issue, how much to walk away from this issue, have a discussion, have a debate about that, and then make a decision that we think is in the best interest of the community.
Great. Makes sense. The last issue I want to bring up is the issue of disability access. Did that come up last night?
Yeah, that was a notice of motion by Councillor Pam Wells, and essentially this was based on some feedback from the community. One of the great things I think that this council has done at the very beginning was formed a whole range of committees that used to be available on council, and some of them are new committees, but some of them were council committees that had existed in the past, and for whatever reason the last council chose to disband most of those committees, and so council reformed lots of those committees. So we've now got lots of consultative committees, lots of committees that are out there in the community. We've got community members who have applied for them. Some of those committees have already started meeting. One of the committees that we didn't reform, which was one that did still exist in the last council, was some form of disability access and inclusion advisory committee. And that was created specifically around a $2 million bucket of money that was available for the changes in the community around disability access and disability inclusion. And the council initially had the assumption that, well, that $2 million has been spent now, having a disability committee to add components to our community when there's no budget to do it probably almost gives people false hope, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of point having a committee that doesn't have any ability to spend any money. The feedback from the community was that it was still important to have that committee despite the fact there was no budget for it. So the Councillor Pam Wells last night moved that to actually reform that committee, and it was supported by councillors, a bit of discussion around it, and there was acknowledgement that there wasn't money to be spent, so we just needed to temper the expectation of the community in terms of what changes might need to be made. So that committee has been reformed, and that will now go out terms of reference, membership of that committee, all the normal process with the committee, and that committee will be formed, and then see what changes we might be able to make in that committee, keeping in mind, as I said, that there is no budget set aside for some of those changes, because some changes have been made over the last couple of years, and that's fantastic from that perspective, but it was unsustainable to keep that level of budget being attributed to that when there are many other things that are crying out for our funds across the community as well.
Yes, fair enough. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Matthew?
No, I think you've covered off pretty well, Sam. That pretty well covers it. It was a fairly full agenda last night for the meeting, and I think that you've covered off pretty much all those really big picture items.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Matthew, for that.
My pleasure.